Imagine you are stranded in the middle of the Sonoran Desert in the year 1880, with no water and no map. The sun is a blazing ball of fire that burns your skin, and the ground is so hot it could fry an egg. You are a dead man walking, and your body will likely be a dried husk within 48 hours. While you are stumbling toward your death, a shadow moves silently across the rocks just a few meters away. An Apache warrior is watching you, and he is not suffering from the heat or the thirst in the slightest. To you, this land is a graveyard, but to him, it is a supermarket filled with food and water and shelter. The Apaches were the absolute masters of desert survival, and they thrived in conditions that killed European soldiers by the hundreds. They knew that fighting the desert was a battle you would always lose, so they learned to become part of it. They did not try to conquer the landscape, but surrendered to its brutal rules to survive. The most critical skill they possessed was the ability to find water where no white man could see it. They knew the location of secret rock pools called tinajas, high up in the granite mountains that held rainwater for months. They would cover these pools with flat stones and brush to stop evaporation and to hide them from their enemies. If there were no rock pools, they knew exactly where the water table was closest to the surface of the dry riverbeds. They would dig deep holes in the sand and wait patiently for the water to seep in through the grains. They used a hollow reed to suck up the precious liquid without disturbing the sand and muddying the water. They also carried their own mobile water supply in a specialized jug, known as a tuss, or a woven basket. This basket was coated inside and out with pine pitch to make it completely watertight and durable. It allowed a warrior to carry several liters of water on his back without the weight of a heavy clay pot. Please take a brief moment to click that subscribe button if you are enjoying this history lesson. It helps me survive the algorithm and continue making these videos for you. Thank you very much for your support. A common myth is that you can just cut open a cactus and drink the water inside like a refreshing beverage. The Apache knew that the sap of most cacti is actually toxic and will cause vomiting and diarrhea that kills you faster. They knew exactly which barrel cactus was safe and how to extract the moisture without poisoning themselves. One of their most ingenious tricks was the practice of carrying a small pebble in their mouth while they walked. This simple object stimulated the production of saliva and kept the mouth moist to reduce the sensation of thirst. It required incredible discipline, but it prevented them from gulping down their water supply too quickly. When it came to food, the Apache saw a feast where the U.S. cavalry saw only thorns and dust. Their staple food was the heart of the agave plant, which they roasted in underground pits for days. The result was a sweet and nutritious pulp that was packed with calories and could be dried for long journeys. They also harvested the beans of the mesquite tree, which is one of the most nutritious plants in the desert. They ground the pods into a flour that was rich in protein and sugar and mixed it with water to make cakes. This desert bread was lightweight and did not spoil, which made it the perfect ration for a war party. Meat was often scarce, so they wasted absolutely nothing when they caught a deer or a rabbit. They would clean the intestines and wrap them around the fire to cook them until they were crispy. They even broke open the bones to eat the marrow, which is pure fat and energy for the body. I have a survival question for you to answer in the comments below regarding this harsh environment. If you were lost in the desert, would you try to walk to safety or stay put and wait for help? I am curious to see what your strategy would be, so let me know. The Apache were famous for their ability to disappear into the landscape, like ghosts in broad daylight. They would rub their bodies with dust and mud to match the exact color of the rocks and the sand. A warrior could be standing 3 meters away from you, and you would never see him until it was too late. They wore moccasins that were specifically designed for the terrain, with high tops to protect against snake bites and cactus thorns. The soles were sometimes made with a protruding piece of leather at the heel and the toe. This disturbed the ground in a way that made the tracks look old or disguised the direction of travel. When they were being pursued, They would never walk in a straight line or leave an obvious trail for the dogs. They would walk on hard rock, where they left no footprints, or step in the tracks of existing animals. Sometimes they would jump from rock to rock for kilometers to break the scent trail completely. The endurance of the Apache runner is the stuff of legend, and it terrified the American soldiers. A warrior could run 100 kilometers in a single day over rough terrain with very little water. They ran with a mouthful of water and breathed through their nose to prove their discipline and efficiency. This mobility allowed them to strike a ranch and be over the next mountain range before the dust had even settled. The army was weighed down by heavy saddles and supply wagons and uniform coats that caused heat stroke. The Apache traveled light with only a knife and a bow and a small pouch of food. They used the smoke of the campfire not just for cooking, but as a sophisticated long-range communication system. They could manipulate the smoke with a blanket to create puffs and streams that carried specific messages. They could warn a distant group about approaching soldiers without ever making a sound. They also used technology against their enemies by using mirrors to flash signals across the vast valleys. They realized that a flash of sunlight could be seen for 50 kilometers in the clear desert air. They created a network of lookouts that functioned like a primitive telegraph system to track the army's movements. When they needed to sleep, they did not build large shelters that would give away their position. They built small wickiups made of brush and branches that blended perfectly into the surrounding bushes. These shelters provided shade during the day and trapped body heat during the freezing desert nights. The temperature swing in the desert is deadly because it can go from 40 degrees to freezing in 12 hours. The Apache knew how to huddle together in small depressions in the ground to share warmth. They used animal skins and dry grass as insulation to survive the night without a fire. Medicinal knowledge was another key to their survival in a land where there were no doctors. They used the creosote bush for almost everything from treating infections to curing stomach problems. The gum from the mesquite tree could be used as an antiseptic for cuts and arrow wounds. If a warrior was injured, they had techniques to manage pain and stop bleeding using only what nature provided. They would pack a wound with spider webs or specific mosses to help the blood clot quickly. Their knowledge of botany was so advanced that it rivaled the science of the time. They also had a psychological advantage because they did not fear the desert the way the white settlers did. To the settler, the desert was a hell that had to be crossed as quickly as possible. To the Apache, it was their mother and their protector, and their fortress against the invasion. Geronimo was the last great leader to use these tactics to evade thousands of American and Mexican soldiers. He traveled with women and children and still managed to stay hidden for months in the rugged canyons. It was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare that is still studied by military strategists today. One of their most clever tricks involved the horses they stole from the ranchers or the army. If a horse became too tired to ride, they did not abandon it to die in the heat. They would eat the horse to regain their strength and use its hide to make new shoes. They would sometimes put shoes on the horses backwards to confuse the trackers following them. The soldiers would think the Apaches were riding south when they were actually riding north. It was a simple trick that bought them precious time to escape into the mountains. The Apache warrior was trained from childhood to endure pain and hardship without complaining. Boys were made to wake up early and run up mountains with their mouths full of water. If they swallowed the water before they reached the top, they had to do it again. This training created a people who were harder than the granite rocks they lived among. They could go days without food and still fight with the ferocity of a mountain lion. It was this toughness that allowed them to resist the might of two nations for so long. The U.S. Army eventually had to hire Apache scouts to catch the renegade bands of Geronimo. They realized that the only person who could track an Apache in the desert was another Apache. It was the ultimate admission that the white man could not master this environment on his own. When the end finally came, it was not because the Apache forgot how to survive in the wild. It was because the government captured their families and transported them to prisons in Florida. They surrendered not to the desert, but to the love for their wives and children. The tragedy is that much of this incredible survival knowledge was lost when they were forced onto reservations. They were forbidden from hunting and gathering and forced to eat government rations of beef and flour. The masters of the desert were turned into dependents in a cruel twist of fate. But today, we are rediscovering these skills as we look for ways to live sustainably. We realize that the Apache understanding of the ecosystem was profound and scientifically accurate. They did not waste water or destroy the land because they knew their lives depended on it. So the next time you turn on the tap and get a glass of cold water, think of them. Think of the warrior running under the sun with a pebble in his mouth. And remember that survival is not about fighting nature, but about understanding it. The desert is still there, and it is just as deadly and beautiful as it was in 1880. The wind still blows through the canyons where Geronimo once hid his people. And if you listen closely, you might hear the silence of the ghosts who knew every secret of the sand.